Social theories help us make sense of reality and provide guidelines for action and policymaking. To explore these political implications of different theories, you will write mini policy briefs that address various social problems from the perspective of specific theories. This tutorial will give you a sense of what a policy brief is and how to write it. A policy brief is different from scholarly writing. It addresses a different audience and has other objectives. As a result, a policy brief has different structure or style. Who is the audience of a policy brief? The audience of the policy brief is the policy maker. Unlike scholarly peers, where we can assume that they know more or less what we know about a topic, policymakers are non-specialists. Imagine, for instance, that you are writing for a congresswoman or a state legislator who is sympathetic to your goal, but in a given week she needs to vote on multiple topics and sit on 2-3 different committees. She probably also suffers from information overload. Furthermore, whereas scholars often spend a great deal of time exploring theoretical issues, policymakers are action-oriented. They need to produce policy, after all. Therefore, the goal of the policy brief is to translate research findings or theories and theoretical interpretations into actionable recommendations. A good policy brief, therefore, must be brief, be short and clear, use conversational style, avoid jargon, and if you are using an acronym, spell it out. Don't assume that they know about it. Think about the prose that newspapers typically use. Approachable but matter of fact. Focus on the main points. Avoid asides or distracting anecdotes. Use subheadings to drive your main points. Some people use subheadings like introduction, but this is really wasteful. A good subheading should inform the reader about what comes next. Flesh out the implications of inaction and provide clear policy recommendations that also analyze the foreseeable outcomes. Or, if a few conflicting policy alternatives present themselves, present the alternative courses of action. Let's think about the structure of a policy brief. The structure of the policy brief is simple. Given that we cannot assume that our audience knows about the topic, begin with a brief overview of the problem. You may need to provide some context, so the roots of the problem become clear. The introduction should be no longer than 2 paragraphs. In the second or third paragraph, provide a theoretically informed interpretation of the problem. If Marx, for instance, is critically concerned with the problems of alienation or exploitation, your interpretation should use these terms to explain the core of the policy problem. You should also use the space to explain what will happen if we fail to address the problem. As a whole, this kind of first section should read as a call for action. Having explained why action is needed, use bullet points to offer 2 or 3 concrete policy or legislative steps to address the problems. These steps should follow from the interpretation provided in the previous paragraph. If you identify more than one recommended course of action, determine the alternative and present them in order of priority. If possible, identify who or which agency should take which steps. The concluding paragraph should remind the reader of why action is needed and assess the implication of following the recommended course of action. In the real world, even the best policy will not fully solve the problem, but only provide some improvement. So it is crucial to communicate realistic expectations. Conclude with a positive tone that looks into the future. Regular policy briefs are not longer than 4 pages. In our case, because the midterm also include other questions, your policy brief needs to be exceptionally brief, no longer than 2, maximum a little longer. I hope this quick review gives you a clear sense of what policy briefs look like. We're almost done, but let me go over the steps you need to take. Start by drawing a quick plan on a piece of paper. Using the form provided in the content section, identify the goal and audience of the brief. Write your objectives. What is the message that you want to communicate to your audience? Make a list of what your audience needs to know for your message to come across. Then, review the list and ask yourself if you can eliminate one or two of those points. Remember, the delete button is your friend here. Finally, identify 2-3 policy recommendations and briefly write them. Having done that, use steps 1 to 5 to create an outline. Write the brief and then take a break. After a decent interval, ideally at least a day, review the brief with an eye for brevity and clarity. When you feel that you're almost ready, share the draft with a few readers. Ask your test audience, A, if the brief is clear and readable. Then ask them, what is the brief's key message? If they don't get it, you need to revise. And finally, do the policy recommendations follow from the analysis? With the input from your test readers, revise, revise, revise. And good luck.